Let us gather our hearts in prayer. Gracious God, be near to each one of us. Bring us your new life. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Mary went to the tomb while it was still dark. And I imagine that as she walked, she suddenly had a thought. The thought that came to her as she walked to the tomb was that this would be the first of many walks to the tomb. She wasn't going to forget Jesus. She wasn't going to forget her Lord. She knew that she would be visiting and coming to that place, to that tomb often, that this would be the first of many. She was somewhat familiar with the garden where the tomb was. She knew it was a lovely place, and she was grateful for that. A wealthy man, Joseph of Arimathea, had donated the tomb. It was where he had planned to be buried himself, so it was very carefully and specially chosen. It was a beautiful location. And for Mary, this was the one, really the only, grace note in days of shock and horror and pain. The one grace note was the beautiful garden in which he now lay. Because as she walked, she suddenly had the thought that this was not just going to be Jesus' special place, this was going to become a special place for her. That this would be a place that she would come often to find peace. She hoped in time to find healing from what had taken place. Where do you go to find peace? Where do you go to find healing? Where do you go to help you deal with the struggles and the difficulties of life? It's funny how cemeteries can sometimes be those places for us, can't they? I know when I'm hanging out at my parents' place, I enjoy often walking up to the Blue Church Cemetery. It's always been a place for me that is special. I have ancestors in the Blue Church dating back to the 1700s, and I enjoy just kind of looking at the names listed there. In fact, I like it so much, I bought my plots already. I think it's a side effect of the job in which I am doing funerals on a regular basis. I'm kind of more aware than many that life is short, that funerals are expensive, and so I figured I might as well get ahead. And so years ago, while I was still in Calgary, I bought 2 full-size casket plots at the Blue Church. I also knew that the old part of the cemetery was sort of filling up, and I figured no matter where I was in life, that's where I wanted to be in death. The funeral directors in Calgary laughed when they heard the price. I guess just like real estate, things are a whole lot cheaper than in Eastern Ontario than they are in downtown Calgary. So I was grateful for that. So now I've got this cute little, large square with these little, there's a word for them, Brent can probably tell me, but these little square things that say Heath on it. So I've got this little plot of land, and it overlooks the St. Lawrence River. It's absolutely beautiful, and I've always threatened to bring along a lawn chair, because it's my only Riverview property that I own. And I figure it's deserving of a lawn chair and a pina colada. Why not enjoy it now? I've paid the money. It's a beautiful location. And the truth is, I hope it always will be. I hope that my children and grandchildren will come to that place too and see it as a beautiful spot. Of course, the garden never did become a place for peace for Mary. In fact, at first, when she arrived at the garden, it became a place of horror and terror because the tomb was empty. She didn't exactly know what had happened, but it seemed as though the tomb had been robbed. And so she ran to the disciples, and they ran back, and when they had witnessed the scene that the body was no longer there, they left, and she just stayed there in their grief. She couldn't believe it. They had taken his sacred life from her, and now they had taken even his sacred death from her. It was just torment upon torment. How could they do this? When Reverend Anthony Bailey went to work last November at Parkdale United Church in Ottawa, the place he normally found peace or at least productivity, he found that the place had brought him back to his own trauma. The walls of the church, the doors of the church had been spray painted with swastikas and hateful racial slurs. Reverend Bailey, who's pictured there, and many in the congregation are black. Talk to any ethnic minority in Canada, in this country, and they will tell you that racism is alive and well in this country. That expression of hatred is bad enough, but for Reverend Bailey, it brought him back. It brought him back to decades ago when his own brother was murdered in Montreal in front of him. Again, strictly because of a racially motivated action. He said in his victim impact statement for last November that the site acted as a trigger because several decades ago, 4 men charged us with knives, having yelled, "Let's go kill these niggers." He says, "My brother bled to death in my arms before help could arrive." What does Easter mean in a bloody and broken world? We come here Easter morning to a beautiful sanctuary with lovely flowers, but we're still haunted by the knowledge that the mother of all bombs has been dropped. And we wonder, with North Korea, we wonder what this means for our world. We come to church hoping to forget our own fears, our own struggles, a loved one who is ill, or a loved one we have just lost. Perhaps the debt we're in, or a broken relationship. Is Easter just a sprinkling of icing sugar on a cake of pain? Is it just a nice short little break before we get back to life and reality? Is it just a cute little SpongeBob SquarePants Band-Aid on a gaping wound? Where do we go to find lasting peace and healing? On Wednesday, our last Lenten service took place, and Shirley Avery gave the message for our Lenten service, and she did a godly play story, and she laid out for us on the floor, she was on the floor herself, a series of pictures that describe Jesus' life, that sort of led up to the span of his life. And the very last picture that she laid out was double-sided. On the one side was Jesus with a crown of thorns, symbolizing his torture and his death. On the other side was Jesus smiling with the bread and the cup, symbolizing the risen Christ. And Shirley told us that the images could not be separated. You couldn't separate the cross from the resurrection. They just don't come apart. You can't have Easter without Good Friday. You can't have Good Friday without Easter, without the resurrection. Jesus went through real torture and death. In Christian tradition, in the Apostles' Creed, in fact, Jesus not only really died on Friday, he went through hell on Saturday. He descended into hell. So his death wasn't even sort of a nice eternal rest kind of death. It was hell. And that's important. He couldn't have real life without having gone through real death. A number of people in our congregation are studying the Book of Forgiving written by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and his daughter Mfo Tutu. And one of the things that we have been learning together is that you can't have real healing and real forgiveness, the freedom that comes from forgiveness, without truly facing the hurt that was done, the injury that was done. The first step on the journey to forgiveness is telling your truth. no matter how brutal that truth is, the first step is facing and telling that truth. But as we face that truth, as we continue to walk through it, by the grace of God, we find real healing and real life and real freedom. Easter is not just a little oasis in the desert that we can enjoy on the weekend before the harsh realities of life hit us again on Monday or Tuesday. Easter changes everything. Because of his great love for this broken world, because of his great love for you, Jesus died and rose again. Something as horrible as death could never hold on to that incredible love that was Jesus. O grave, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Reverend Anthony Bailey had no illusions that the world is a good place. His security, his peace is not found in a place or in a situation, but in the person of the risen Christ. It makes all the difference in the world. When asked about the hate crime, Reverend Bailey said, "It's shocking, but we as a congregation and as people of faith, we reject this. We are outraged. But we will not be deterred in our work for love and reconciliation and bringing people together." And Reverend Bailey doesn't just preach it, he walks the walk. Reverend Bailey, along with members from the Muslim and Jewish communities who were also targeted last November by the same troubled youth, and an incredible hate-filled youth, they have each of them offered to come together to help this team. They have offered to work with him in a collaborative justice style, which is an approach to justice that focuses on repairing the harm caused by the crime while holding the offender accountable for his actions. What it does is it brings together all of the different parties and understands the needs of the different parties, and that seeks a resolution that brings healing, that brings reparation, reintegration, and prevents further harm. The judge will make his final decision on the sentencing in May. Reverend Bailey hasn't gone this route because he's a nice guy. He is a nice guy, but that's not why he's gone this route. He's gone this route because he himself has been through hell, and he himself knows the life and the healing that can be found in the person of Jesus Christ and in following that path, that way of life and love. As Mary stood firm in her grief and her fear, Mary eventually did find peace and healing in the garden. But it wasn't the place that gave it to her. It was the person. It was the person. And it's kind of neat that she didn't even, at first, she doesn't even seem to recognize what's happened when she sees the angels. She doesn't seem to recognize that they are angels, or even recognize the risen Christ right away. It's only when she hears her name, Mary, Mary, that all of a sudden her eyes are opened, and she knows that everything is different. She knows he is alive. Those words, that word spoken to her meant more than 1,000 beautiful gardens. She knew that they would heal her deepest hurts. I do believe in sacred space. I do believe in places where we can go. For some of you, perhaps it's this sanctuary. I know this sanctuary is a sacred space for me, and sometimes I just come and sit. And the sanctuary is open 5 days a week, and people do just sometimes come and sit in a pew quietly and talk to God. For many, that sacred space is somewhere along the river, or perhaps it's a cemetery. There are sacred spaces, and it's good to go. But as you go, know that it's not the place that heals. Go and seek the author of life. Go and seek the one who truly brings life, because he's been through death, through hell, and has been raised to life. Thanks be to God. Let's stand and sing and crown him the Lord of life. Amen.